I always thought that I would find my place in the world eventually, that no matter how lost or uncertain I felt, I would discover where I belonged, a place where I was truly happy, where I could finally be myself. But sometimes, life has other plans. Sometimes you find yourself in a place where you're not meant to stay, and the journey you take doesn't always end the way you imagined it would. My name is Emily, and this is the story of the girl who wasn't meant to stay. The story of my journey, the places I've been, and the lessons I've learned along the way. It all started when I was 16. My family had just moved to a small town on the outskirts of a big city. I wasn't thrilled about it. I had grown up in a neighborhood where I had friends, a school I loved, and a sense of belonging. Moving to a new town, to a completely different school, felt like starting over from scratch, and I hated it. I remember sitting in the back seat of our car as we drove down the winding roads, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape, feeling like I was leaving behind everything that made me feel secure. When we finally arrived at our new home, everything felt foreign. The house was smaller than the one we had left behind, and the town itself was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. There were no bustling streets or bright city lights. Instead, everything was calm, slow-paced. It felt like a place where people had lived for generations, and they didn't need anyone new to come along and shake things up. It was as if everyone already had their own little world, and I was an outsider trying to fit into a puzzle I didn't belong in. The first day of school was a blur. I remember walking into the crowded hallway trying to find my locker, feeling a knot in my stomach as I passed groups of students chatting and laughing. They all seemed to know each other. They were all part of something, while I was just me. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know where to sit in the cafeteria or who to talk to during lunch. I didn't know how to break into the already established social circles. I was lost, and I felt invisible. It wasn't long before I realized that the town I had moved to had a way of making you feel like you either fit in or you didn't. And unfortunately, I didn't. The other kids were friendly enough, but it wasn't like I had found my place. I spent the first few weeks sitting alone at lunch, reading a book or scrolling through my phone, trying not to draw attention to myself. I hated the feeling of being the new girl. I hated feeling like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But then one day, I met Sophie. Sophie was everything I wasn't. She was confident, outgoing, and had a way of making people feel like they had known her their whole life after just a few minutes. She had a group of friends who adored her, and she was always laughing, always joking around. She had a sparkle in her eye that made her stand. She turned to me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was fear. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but I could tell she wasn't. I could see the mask slipping just for a second. I didn't press her any further, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sophie than I had realized. I had always thought of her as the girl who was meant to be here, the girl who was always going to fit in, always going to be the one everyone turned to. But what if she wasn't? What if Sophie was just as lost as I was, just as unsure of herself, but hiding it better than anyone else? And that's when I started to see things differently. I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, we were both in the same boat. We were both trying to find our place in the world, and maybe neither of us was meant to stay in this town forever. Maybe we were just passing through, learning lessons along the way. As the months went by, Sophie and I grew even closer. I learned more about her, her dreams, her fears, her family, and I began to understand that the sadness I had seen wasn't something that could be fixed by a smile or a joke. It was something deeper, something she had been carrying with her for a long time. But I also realized that no matter how much we tried to hide it, we couldn't run from who we were. We couldn't escape the parts of ourselves that we were afraid to face. One day, Sophie came to me and told me that she was moving away. Her family had decided to leave the town, to start fresh somewhere else. At first, I didn't know how to react. Part of me was happy for her, happy that she would have a chance to start over and find herself again. But another part of me was sad, Sad that I would lose the one friend who had made me feel like I mattered, even for a little while. The truth is, I never really felt like I belonged here, Sophie confessed one night, just before she left. I tried to fit in, to be the girl everyone wanted me to be, but I just couldn't. I wasn't meant to stay here. I wasn't meant to stay anywhere, really. But I've learned something important along the way, that I don't need to stay in one place to be happy. I just need to keep moving forward. I understood then. Sophie wasn't meant to stay, and neither was I. We were both just passing through, learning, growing, and finding our way. We were both girls who weren't meant to stay, but in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes, it's okay not to belong. Sometimes, it's okay to not have everything figured out. And sometimes, the journey you take leads out in a room full of people. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make it feel warmer. People gravitated toward her, and I remember thinking, she's the kind of person who's always meant to be here. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be someone who fit in, who belonged. One day during lunch, Sophie noticed me sitting alone. I had been reading my book, as usual, trying to avoid the awkwardness of eating alone. She walked over to my table with that trademark smile of hers and asked if she could sit with me. I was taken aback at first. No one had ever invited me to sit with them before, at least not in a place like this. But I nodded, grateful for the company. "You're Emily, right?" Sophie asked, already pulling up a chair. "I haven't seen you around much. You're new here, right?" I nodded again, a little shy. "Yeah, just moved here a few weeks ago." Sophie smiled. "I get it. It's hard to find your way around here at first. But don't worry, I'll help you out. I'm Sophie, by the way. You can call me Sophie the Great if you want." We both laughed, and for the first time since I had moved, I didn't feel so alone. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and I became fast friends. She introduced me to her group of friends, and although I still felt a little out of place at times, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could find my place here. Sophie was my guide through this new world, showing me where to go, who to talk to, and how to blend in. But as much as I appreciated Sophie's friendship, there was a part of me that always felt like an outsider. Sophie had a certain ease about her, an effortless confidence that I envied. She was the kind of person who seemed to have everything figured out, and I was just trying to keep up. I started to notice that Sophie was always the center of attention, always the one people turned to. She had a way of making everything look so simple, so natural. Meanwhile, I felt like I was constantly struggling to find my footing. It wasn't long before I started to realize something about Sophie that I hadn't noticed before. Behind the bright smile, behind the laughter, there was a sadness, a quiet, hidden pain that she didn't let anyone see. There were moments when she would pull away from her friends, when her eyes would lose that spark, and I would catch her staring off into space, lost in her thoughts. I started to wonder if there was more to Sophie than she was letting on, but every time I tried to ask, she would brush it off with a joke or a change of subject. One afternoon we were hanging out in her room, chatting about life and school, when Sophie suddenly went quiet. She was staring out the window, her fingers tapping nervously on the side of her bed. "Sophie?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?"